So Carolyn, just for Cece's sake, especially, and also for the context of the book, could you just describe it, to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing, uh, just in broad strokes, as it's relevant to compassion and disciple making?
Okay. I myself, I guess my primary call, I would say, is to minister God's love to people. So I do have a business. I have a music school, which Bob has been to. And that is, I love doing it. I love running the business. Prior to that, I guess I was in more formal ministry, but I like having, um, working with people through, I guess, the area of music, which is my skill set. And I still have a, a, a great love for sharing God's love with people and a great love for people. So several times a year when we're not in COVID, I will go to China or the Far East and visit with the various people I've made relationship with across various places in that continent, uh, particularly in a village that God opens doors to, and start to develop relationships with a guy that took care of orphans for a good 17 years at that point. And things unfolded sort of in a way I wasn't looking for, but it was clearly God. And ended up that he was, I guess he had a prior relationship with people that were funding orphans. And so he just mentioned to me, and I said, hey, I called my church, hey, you want to support orphans? Or yeah. So we ended up establishing relationship with him and the orphans there. And so um, the eventually we ended up opening a couple of businesses together. And I go there to meet with the kids and have retreats or just meet with them one-on-one, and as well as the young adults there that help us. So that is
So
one.
so so how did you sense that call of God to engage in China?
Oh, okay, that is a compassion story, I guess. I became um, I got acquainted with Jesus as as God in my teenage years. I was 15, and soon after that, I just had an appreciation for people that died for their faith. And I remember that one place that happened was in China at that time. Was a they're pretty known for their persecuted church. So I had that in my heart. It wasn't until, and I did go to China back then. That was when it had just opened in 1982. They opened in 1979, and was not real interested in China for years and years. I'm Japanese by heritage, and not even interested in Japan. But 30 years later, um, well, short of 30 years later, I was unpacking. No, I was at a, well, I had been at my business and I just had a sense of learn Chinese. It was like a voice, and it was like learn Chinese. And I thought, huh, interesting. And I tried, but it was really hard. So I stopped. And then the next year I was at a conference and it was a really strong learn Chinese. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I remember the context was I was holding hands with a Chinese person on my right and my left. We were praying for the for the persecuted church. And I mean, it was a situation at that time in China, and they were going to bulldoze over a church. And they started wailing, and I started wailing. I don't know where it came from, but it just started. This wail came out of me, and I started to cry and cry, and so it brought me back to that time 30 years before when that there was sort of that burden that I had, and I didn't have the ability or the connected. I wasn't very connected with myself back then. I just told myself I'm not going to cry again. So I couldn't really cry back in those years. But something had happened as the years went on. I did pray at I remember a significant point in my young adulthood when I prayed that my heart would break with the things that broke the heart of God. And I think that started something where tears started flowing to the point where it comes quite often, quite natural. And so I think that context was a healing that I got to be able to wail, I guess, at that point. But I didn't know where it came from. But all I knew was I had that heavy sense of, okay, learn Chinese, and that was all at that point. So until and then it turned out as I learned Chinese, I became interested in China. So I said I couldn't wait to go to China. So after 30 years of really not caring about anything in Asia, suddenly couldn't wait to go to China. I went. I didn't know anybody there. I went by myself. Somebody let me use their house, so I was very grateful. And that started a journey of going back and forth, learning the language, getting to know people. And so this particular trip was at least a few years into my traveling. I just got to know a teacher that online basically, and she invited me to her village. And I thought, oh, I always wanted to go to that area. So I thought, I'm just going to rough it. I'm just going to, I'm just going to, yeah, that'll be interesting to rough it in a village for a month in China. I've usually stayed more in the cities. And so I went out there, and basically one day I needed shoes. Like, it's very muddy and stinky and everything. And I just, so I went, and in my mind I had, the kind of shoe I wanted. It's like a Crocs type of shoe. And so I was riding my bike, and then I just thought like the third store happened to be, I don't know, highlighted, or I just thought I'm going to go to that one. I started, I went inside, and then I saw the shoe that was in my imagination. So I thought, oh, that's a shoe. And then I tried it on, and it fit. I didn't even need to try another size. And so the guy started talking to me, and my Chinese was really bad at that point. And he started speaking English, and I said, oh, you know English? He said, yeah, I've been to America. I'm like, really? I'm from America. Where did you go? He said, Los Angeles. I'm like, what? I'm from Los Angeles. Where? And he said, I went to a fellowship. I'm like, what? I'm a fellowship girl too. Like, because it was all underground, in that area. So there's nowhere I could have found a Christian, but he ended up being a Christian. So anyway, I bought the shoe. The next day or a few days later, I went to my favorite breakfast place, and he was there. And I said, what are you doing here? He said, I live here. I live right above. So and he had his child, his baby with him. And so we started talking. He invited me to his church. And then I started just to he just invited me to one or two different things. He started talking about the orphans that he had accumulated, the relationships he's accumulated through the 17 years. It's not an orphanage. He was at an orphanage, but after he left, they still keep in touch with him, and he became the go-to guy in the area. Anytime somebody has a hardship or a child that they can't take care of, they'll just call him. So that's how I ended up. I had a relationship with him, and that's the story of me.
So when you would go over there, would you like stay a month at a time, or what?
Yeah. In particular, that was the first time I stayed for a month. And when I go to China, it's usually 2 months on my visa. Have I stayed longer? The longest I've done is 2 months, but then gone 3 times a year.
So you had enough teachers at the music store that you could then excuse yourself for 2 months.
Yeah, I had teachers. It wasn't easy. I mean, having somebody run the store, it was always hard to manage both. But
Right,
yeah.
right. Okay. So so give us an example of compassion ministry that led to making disciples,
Compassion ministry.
or compassionate acts. I'm not talking about it doesn't have to be formal, just caring for people, loving on people.
Well, I know that my MO when I this whole 10 years has been one of not having an agenda, because I had worked for organized churches, and there was always something I needed to do. This was my whole journey there has not been anything like that. It's just been enjoyable. So I think that having myself freed up, just I think my main purpose is to connect with people, and I think
Okay.
that
So just describe a time when you connected with somebody.
okay. Uh, I would say there almost every time there's a few people that I meet. Okay, so one of them, okay, one was in Nanjing, and I ended up, I needed a place to stay. It's a place where the Japanese had really done horrific things to the Chinese there. I met somebody online. It was an older woman. I thought, oh, I think I could stay with her. And um, she, anyway, we met online, but I guess she didn't think I was, she thought I was American, whatever that means. So when I got there, she said, I thought you were American. I said, oh, I am American. And she said, oh, I thought Americans have longer noses or something like that. So anyway, it was, we were in the back of a bus. We were going to her place. And I said, well, I'm actually Japanese. And then she didn't look at me. And maybe I was super self-conscious, but it was really silent. So, but I was, we were speaking English, not everybody understood. But when I just had a feeling like, oh, that really touched on something. And so I think I asked in the bus, oh, are you from Nanjing? Like, were you born here? And she said, yeah. And actually for several generations, which means they had been through the war, which means they had been through the horrific stuff. And she actually had an uncle die from the Japan invasion. So anyway, we ended up in her apartment late, and later on that night, I just asked her, would you, actually, I didn't even, I think I asked her, would you show me the Japanese museum, where it's basically the Holocaust museum? And she said, I don't know if I can go there. And so I said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And then I just started crying. And then she started crying. And then it was awkward because we didn't even know each other very well. But that opened the door. So she did end up taking me to the Japanese Holocaust Museum, and I asked her if she could take me to some churches as well. So she did, and she had no introduction to God or anything. So I told her that night that I was a Christian, and that I'm just really sorry that about what happened, and I guess she at that point was able to kind of accept what I was saying, this apology. Um, but I guess when she started to take me to churches, every church, I just said, I'm so sorry. I'm Japanese and I'm so sorry. And every time I would start to cry. And then, and actually there was the first church I went to, we came at like a morning hour, and they were just getting out of a service, and the person that was there, she said, "Oh, come in," and she ended up being the pastor. And so it was a random time that we showed up, but she had, and then anyway, she started crying too. She showed me around the whole church, and she how long do you want me to keep going?
You're fine. You're fine.
Okay, so so we ended up going to the tower and praying the Lord's Prayer together, her in Chinese, me in English. And then she said, go to this church. It was the biggest church in the whole city. And I knew of it, but I was going to go on another day. And she said, no, go right now because they'll receive you. So I went. She showed us how to get there by bus. And my friend introduced me, and we said, oh, is the pastor here? And they said, no, no, he's off today. And so I said, oh, okay, that's okay. So I was looking around, and my friend told her, she's from America. And they said, oh, just a minute. And so they made a call, and he came down with his full collar, everything. And he was like, he gave me just the royal treatment. And he took me in a back room. It was very formal, like a big ambassador seat next to each other, and then your seats on the side. And I was in my running clothes, and he said, you're the first Japanese American I ever met. I'm like, what? You're kidding. And so this is the biggest, it was 5,000 people in this church. So the biggest church in the nation. So he ended up in the city. He ended up being sort of this bishop type person over the city. So he was connected to the above ground as well as the underground. He had been through the war. His father was blinded by the attack. And so he taught his son, scripture through song, just through singing, because he couldn't read anymore. So anyway, yeah.
So tell us a bit more, unpack a bit more this connection with the shoe guy.
Oh.
And so then you then made connections, if I understand the story from our previous conversation, that you made connections with people in the States to help with these orphans. So in other words, you were a link person in some ways to help.
Yeah, I guess my burden is, just to our burden. His name is John in China, and our goal is to get these 10 or so out of the hundreds he knows, 10 of them, to get them to graduate college, to really focus on educating them, get them to graduate college. So even if it's my own money, I'm going to send a semester to it, every semester, the tuition, to get them to college. So definitely there's people. It started off with my house church that was supporting, but so there's some from that, and people, there are people that help.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So you helped through this connect with this guy, John, that had these orphans, and he selected 10 that to try and help them get through college. And then you partnered with that through your own money, as also trying to get others involved in doing that.
Right.
Then you also mentioned helping them start some businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about those. Yeah. What kind of businesses? How did that come about?
Okay, well, John already had his shoe store, which is where I met him. And so at one of those trips, when I go to China, sometimes I'll visit him once or twice and then go other places. So one of those little trips, I said, how easy is it or difficult is it to open a store on that main strip where you're on? And he said, oh, very easy. Like, you could open one. I was like, he said, you should start a children's clothing store, because in 2 years at that time, they're going to have the second child policy. Up to then, it was just on one child. He said, then everybody's going to want children's clothing. I'm like, wow, that's a good idea. He said, then we could support the orphans. And it's like, wow, that's a really good idea. So I left, and I was thinking about that the whole time. I was like, that's a really good idea. So I went back, and his wife is a businessman. So he's more of the orphan, guy. His wife is like a really sharp in business. So she was running some different stores in the big city. So so we met together, and she proposed we go 50-50. And so I thought, wow, that's great. That's a great plan, because that way they've got skin in the game. And so we're not just giving money, but so we're going 50-50. And we all care about the orphans. That's our goal. So anyway, I thought it was going to be a year later, but after I came back, the whole place was flooded, which it often does. The whole village was flooded, and it kind of wiped people out when that happens. But just so happened the rent was super cheap, um, and the people who had this the franchise were in town. That John and his wife liked that franchise, and they thought it was very promising. So they called me a couple months later. They said, "How about now?" And so I'm like, "Wow!" So it was a really, I took a few weeks to make sure, pray about it, and all that. It's a big chunk of change, um, and then yeah, I had a few kind of confirmations that I asked God for, and more or less happened. So one of them was my mom, and my mom was also praying. So we went to Schwab. We were on a family vacation. We went to Schwab, and my mom had been praying, if it's of God, that there would be a parking space really close to the door, and it was right in front of the door. So we went out, and so yeah, I wired the money over. They said, "You're sure it's not a scam, right?" And I said, "Yes, it's not a scam." So sent the money over. Ended up that they did very well. So we put in a total of like 30,000 US dollars, and they got back 7,000 in the grand opening. The grand
Wow.
opening, just the first few days. So it ended up going very well. And then the company liked them, so they asked them to open another one, and that would have been right in that same area, because this one that we opened was an hour away, but the one the company was asking them to open would be right next to their house. So John never says we need money. He just says, "Oh, please pray for us, because we have this opportunity." So of course, I take him up on that. I start praying, and that at that point it's like a lot of money. The first one was mine. The second one I had to ask who if there's anybody and that wanted to support this, and that was harder. And it was also harder um, actually pulling the trigger, because then it's somebody else's money. And so I started to really question God, and I remember just getting an answer. Don't you know? Do you think that? Don't you think that I love the orphans? Don't you think that I love you and John and what you're doing? And so I had the sort of confirmation in my heart, in my spirit, that okay, yeah, what was I thinking? So did send that over, and yeah, they repaid everything, and the goal was to also have use that. Sorry, Mike, use that to support any extra like living fees or clothing for the other orphans in the area. There's about 300 or so. So during the year, especially wintertime, it's hard for them. It's hard for them to get basic needs. So we try to give them clothing and food with that money.
Okay, so the business that would generate profits then that would supply clothing and food for orphans.
Yeah.
Cool. What else? Other businesses that have started?
No.
Okay. So tell us about how some people came to Christ through these connections.
Oh yeah. I
She's an evangelist, CC. Loves people as an evangelist. So
it's just I think what I've defined again my role is just connecting people, or letting people know that there is a God, and that this God loves us, that cares about us. So I think that's as far as people can grasp in one bite, because they're largely not, yeah, they don't have that idea even that there is a God. So even to have a God, that's a novel idea. So um, so if I can just say that much, and that this is not some far away thing, but it's a person that we relate to. Um, I think almost every person, at least in the first on my first trip, I probably met and got to know about 7 people that was there over the month, and they're all trying to help me learn the basic of basic Chinese. And but then I would try to get that one thing. I said, how do you say God? How do you say that, God loves you and all this? So they would translate and said, oh yeah. So then that would give me a way to communicate with them. And nobody was really interested in accepting the Lord at that point. But after 3 years, I kind of looked back at all of those people, and about, I don't know, there was probably 9 or so. So about six or seven out of the 9 were very open to the gospel at that point, and all at least accepted that idea. Um, so yeah, people have definitely. It's taken time, and I've thrown out the idea, and they might not be ready, but yeah, over time I just looked back and I was like, oh, that's kind of amazing. As I kept relating to them, they're more and more open to that idea, and they're always willing to have you pray for them, for sure. So um, yeah, I felt like it was just a wide open door, um, but always careful not to push my beliefs on them. Like, I'm just telling them, there is a God, and that's why I'm here. Like that's why. So I didn't just come here because I wanted to travel. It's because I know that God asked me to learn Chinese, so I'm learning Chinese, and just wanted you to know that. And yeah, I think they're just open to seeing how God had influenced me, and um, yeah, they're willing to accept that.
Cool. Cece, do you have any questions or things that you want to ask?
Well, I was wondering, are Christians still somewhat persecuted in China, or has that changed over your time there?
It comes and goes, and China is so big and varied that some people will say, "Oh no, we don't have persecution here. That's a long time ago." But some are like, "Whoa, don't tell anybody you talk to me." Like, like, so it's in spot in, yeah, hot spots there, and that have history. There was when the current president got into office, that was 2014, and 2016 he put in this. Um, he made Christianity, no, he made the unregistered church, Christian church, illegal. So was getting everybody to register again, which is a big red flag for a lot of these Christians who had in past generations had known believers. So they were freaking out. But for the ones that it's all new, they're like, it's no big deal. So yeah, it just varies so much. But there are definitely horrific things that happen these days for belief. I mean, you have organ harvesting, and I mean, just very severe, torturous things for belief. That criminalism, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
crime of believing.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what do people that are reading our book need to know about uh, loving God, loving others, making desire, because that's you basically just were following the promptings of the Spirit.
Um,
So what wisdom or counsel or encouragement would you give to people?
I really think you have to love people. You just have to love them. Like, don't go taking some Western message there and sitting a bunch of pastors down and teaching whatever theology, doctrine or theology. It's just not going to be as relevant as you think it will be.
Mm-hmm.
It just, you really just love the people. That's my thing. And I think the entryway is compassion and empathy. Like when you can really feel and listen to what people are saying and feel it, then that ministers more than anything.
Okay.
So,
Give us an example of a time that you did that kind of listening and empathy.
oh, for myself, I think that's kind of who I've become. And when I pray, so it's really, it's hard for me to bring in a message these days. But I just ministering. So I have a lot of healing that I went through, so that I perhaps have tools when I'm come across with people that need to process hurtful things, just the past. So um, I was with a couple, um, and so they both had parental issues. So there were a young parents of a child, and so I just I don't know, sensed, or I asked the woman if we could maybe focus on what she wanted to talk about. And I think I ended up asking about her mother, and she just exploded in tears, and I cried too. Um, and I have a different, I guess it's a tool or questioning that to help people pray through hurt, to bring them through to healing, which is a helpful tool. But I think just crying with her, um, it hit a chord in me to and just to wait, until that she sat with the hurt, that needed to happen, before asking God to heal it. So just sitting with her, and she actually, when and she they were wanting to be trained in this type of ministry, and she said, "Yeah, the one thing I noticed that you really cried." I said, "Yeah, I couldn't help it," but so at that point, I wasn't analyzing what I just told you, but I think at that point, um, I mean, I really couldn't help myself. But I think looking back, I think that's really what the ministry is just hearing people and crying with them and letting them air the hurt and inviting God into those spaces where they haven't um, opened up to God.
Hmm. Listening and empathy.
Like that.
That's good.
Mhm.
So when you see these folks that have come to Christ, like those seven or so of the nine, for instance, that became followers of Jesus, what does their life look like, and how are they living a life of love and helping others?
Um, I've lost touch with most of those, but oh, actually not. Well, some of those. But there's a kid that grew up, and so she was 10 when I met her, so she's about 18 now. She's so well, I feel like at least our relationship, there's a bond there. It's
Hmm.
um yeah, I don't know. Okay, if I were to look at those that really matured, there's a guy that um he was he's now a lawyer. So when I met him, he was just very interesting. I was just sharing with a group of counselors, and as he was one of them, he was learning counseling from one of my friends, and so he wanted to talk after, and I just he was really interested in the Bible, so I just gave him like a 3 hour short version of the whole Bible. this, and this, then this happened. And then at the end, he said, wait, go back to Abraham again. Tell me about Abraham. And I said, God told him when he was almost 90 or 80 to leave your land and go to another land. And then, so, wow, interesting. So at that point, he was a government worker. He had started this counseling class because he wanted to become a counselor, or God wanted to grow in counseling. But then after I came back, he contacted me and he said, wait, can you tell me about Abraham again? So I said, yeah. So he basically left everything he had. He went to this new place, took everything with him. And he said, interesting. And then another time later, he said, okay, because of you, I'm a lawyer now. I'm like, what? He said, yeah, you told me about Abraham. Because of Abraham, he left everything. And I wanted to be a lawyer, but my wife didn't let me. But because of Abraham, I left my job. And then I'm going to be a lawyer. And so, like, oh my gosh. So then, but he's very, I could imagine him being a lawyer, So I said, that's good, I guess. And so he said, yeah, he's sending out his resume. So over a couple months, he sent out his resume to like 10 different employers, law firms, and 8 of them got back to him. And all of his top 3 got back to him. And so he had interviews with all of them. And I was like, how did that happen? And so he said he had the degree, but when they were younger, they got married, and it's not as stable, or to try and be a lawyer. So, they had kids, and now their kids are teenagers, and now it's way too risky to change careers. But he's, turns out he's very good at it. And so his top firms, he got his top choice, and he said, yeah, so because of Abraham. So after that, he called me his pastor, which I thought was odd, but I think maybe because I'm a foreigner, he just gave me that sort of honor. But he wasn't going to a church at that time. And so he, again, he contacted me. He said, is it important to be baptized? And I said, yeah, it is. And I told him why. And then the next month, he contacted me again. He said, okay, I got baptized. I'm like, wow. So he was really kind of listening, looking to me for something, for approval or guidance or something. I'm willing to run with that. So to this day, he drops me texts and says how it's going with his wife and his son, and they take me out when I'm there. And he is now a secretary of the party, the one party. And in fact, for his law firm, which is a very honored seat. But he asked one time, is that okay? Is that not good because I'm a Christian? And so anyway, I was like, yeah, that's good. So he's holding this kind of prominent seat on behalf of this, atheistic party, and that demands that their members be atheists. And so I would say, as long as you don't have any conflict, and he says, oh no, it's fine to be a Christian. So that's one of the odd ones. He seems to be fine, and he'll text me verses and says, today I read blah blah blah, John whatever, and it told me that I need to love my son better or something like that. So he's pretty open, and he said, oh, it's been God's blessing that he's this party secretary of his law firm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So he was one that was definitely listening to the Holy Spirit, wasn't he?
I guess, yeah. The way it turned out, yeah, right.
Well, yeah, and then checking with you for some confirmation or some guidance, but it sounds like God was prompting him, and he was following those promptings.
Very good story.
So what's your future look like once COVID allows travel again?
I am not sure about China. Actually, I had a sense that there was a 10-year window. And this was back in 2014. I started 2010, is when God told me to learn Chinese. And um, I'm grateful. I have, my parents are still, they're very healthy in their 80s. I have pets. And I would also always think, when I was in China, I would always think, oh, I need to be back here. So I could never fully feel um, great being there for a long time. And then,
Right, because you're the primary caregiver of your parents.
so well, yeah, I would miss them. I think more than anything, I just miss out on their life. I think, and so I just had in my mind 10 years for some reason, and then COVID hit in year 10, and I thought, oh, interesting that I couldn't go this year at all if I wanted to. So I'm at a crossroads where I am open to what if there's another assignment that God has. I'm committed to this work with John and the orphans, and so that'll go on. But I feel like that has developed into its own thing, so that it's not at all reliant on me. I feel I can come in and out and have a whole good group of people that that I feel very very comfortable with, and very open to hearing if I have any new thing to say, anything to share from the Lord. And so I do have that commitment. I have, of course, friends, the same friends across China. I don't, yeah, so I'm not, and actually it's been good for me to be here during this chaotic time in our American history, because I feel like God has sharpened a lot of my own thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, created, I think there's another part of my voice that needed to come out during this time, and that's being sharpened. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So could you summarize sort of what is your philosophy of life, ministry that drives, in other words, in 2 or 3 paragraphs, could you just sort of share your heart, what God has put upon you, what He's called you to? Um,
Yes, okay, the essential thing that I think what I wish I knew in the beginning, and I will constantly wish that I know at the end, is how much God loves me. And I think that's a lesson that I can never know enough.
mm-hmm.
And that's the one thing I tell people when I start to share um, that there is a God, is that how much He loves them, how much He loves me. And when I can be in touch with that, and God's love for the person in front of me is I think when I'm doing, yeah, His will at its best for me. Um, and so I hope that's the thing people experience through me at the end of my life, that would say. Um, there happen, I guess I'm wired in a way that I like doing a lot of different things, and I get interested in a lot of things, that I learn them, I enjoy learning, I learn them well. And so I guess that makes me easily bored. It also makes me easily distracted. So I'm aware of the way that I'm made up, but I think if I were to reel, yeah, to reel that all, I mean, I do wish I can use, I do hope that I can use all of the skills that I have to help people. And I find that's my natural inclination, is to help people. But sometimes that can get in the way of loving people, and sharing God's love with people. So Yeah, I
How
think it's
how can it get in the way?
helping can interfere because I think it can shortcut uh, what God's doing, what God could do for people, what God could do for me. Um, it's like a reflexive a reflex that it could very well be godly, but it could very well be bless you. Um, it could um, very well be the thing that makes me most comfortable draw to draw attention to I myself, or resource that I could bring. Um, I mean, for most of the time, I hope that helping people is a reflection of God's love, but sometimes it's not that it's not, but it just takes away from a deeper how somebody or I could experience God in a deeper way.
Okay, I so what I'm hearing you say is that if the focus is too soon on the doing as the initial step, that can short circuit the experience of God and the love of God, and then the experience of loving others really genuinely. But that if you're connected first with the experiencing the love of God, and then listening and empathizing with people, that then you're in a better place, that then flowing out of what God is doing, then helping happens, but it's more of a byproduct. But the help, the ministry is at a much deeper level, uh, and then results in some of the practical things that are helping people.
Right. That's true. So it is doing it too soon that takes away. And there's also sometimes when my helping is actually shaming to somebody because they had to be helped and they
Mm.
didn't really want to be helped. And so by doing it too soon, you sort of don't really help.
What I'm hearing and listening to the stories you've been sharing today is that you really seek opportunities as you're just with people to see how God can allow you to connect with them on that deeper level through the listening and empathy, and really connecting on that personal, authentic, being present, um, and then the help. Um, you don't want to be premature, because if the person doesn't really want or need help at that point, or not ready for the help that they need, that to try and offer that too soon would then truncate the deeper work that God may want to do in them.
Yes, yes. And it also does not allow me to express the love, which is should be the main thing. What I'm expressing is help. So, okay, I'll give you an example. The other week, I took a computer over to a single older woman in her 80s. She had her partner had passed away and for 8 years ago, and so she didn't have she only had that computer from 8 years ago. So being my helpful self, I took her over a new one, and I set it up, and I gave her a new email, and so she was happy at the moment and grateful. But 2 days later, she called my mom and asked if it would be okay if she talked to me. That actually, could I take the computer away, because she was freaking out because she was getting all these phone calls with that they had her identity and this and that. And I, again, being my helpful self, said, Oh, I know what that's like. I had my identity stolen too, and all you have to do is hire or buy this identity guard thing, and that freaked her out even more. So what I was doing by helping is really freaking her out even more, and that's not really, I think, what she needed in the first place.
Hmm. So the importance of discernment of when to act and in what way to act.
Right, right, right.
But I also hear the importance of being present with people, being authentic and genuine, and let love be the connection.
Yeah.
And then it flows from there as the Spirit guides.
Yeah, yeah.
Very helpful, very
Yeah.
helpful, and very insightful. Thank you, Carolyn.
Oh, well, I love that you're writing a book about compassion and discipleship. So,
Yeah, the working title we have at the moment is Undivided Discipleship, Living and Loving like Jesus.
mm, mm,
And following God with the whole heart and loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and so forth.
mm,
Then that flows in loving your neighbor as yourself and the making of disciples.
mm. Yeah, awesome.
So, well, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. Of course, you'll get a copy of the book.
Oh, thanks.
Uh,
I'm
uh,
excited.
and so you're on the list for that. And we'll also share with you whatever we share, write about you to make sure it's accurate and that you're okay with it.
Oh,
So
awesome.
um, I'll send you the recording. I'll probably just transfer the file via Dropbox so you can just download it and you can have that.
Okay.
Cece, did you have anything else you wanted to capture?
I think the questions I had early on got answered. Yeah, I think it's been covered.
Good. Thank you, Carolyn.
Oh,
This will
you're
be a
welcome.
good contribution. We appreciate that so much.
Oh, I'm honored. I'm honored. Thanks
Yeah.
for asking. Yeah, I look
Okay.
forward to hearing, what happens.
Okay. Well, till next time, right?
Yeah, right.
Nice.
We'll see
Okay.
you.
All right.
Bye.